Hello everybody, I'm Louise Todd. I'm based at Edinburgh Napier University, where I'm an associate professor in festivals and events in the Tourism and Languages group. As well as that, I am the public engagement research lead for the school, and previously to being at Napier, my background was in visual arts and marketing and communications, and all of these areas to some extent draw together my own areas of interest in terms of research. Now, the paper I'm going to talk about today explores how two quite distinct stakeholder groups engage with a festival city through their own visual representations of the city and its festivalised spaces and places. And I suppose more broadly about how it gets us to start to think about how we do engage with cities in different parts of the city. The setting of the research is Edinburgh. No surprise, I'm based in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is obviously Scotland's capital city, and as well as that, it is self-branded as the world's leading festival city. We see this forming the strapline in terms of Festivals Edinburgh's branding of the city, they being the strategic umbrella brand for Edinburgh's international festivals. The two stakeholder groups I'm focusing on are firstly strategic festival management groups, mainly the festival organisations, and secondly members of a community in Edinburgh, which is the Westerhales community in the southwest of the city. More about that later on. And taking a semiotic view of how each of the groups portrays Edinburgh's festivals and engagement with it through visual imagery. This study is an exploratory study, so I'm still at the stage of looking at the images and so on. But it's informed by festival city discourses from the literature, from the media, alongside a primary and secondary event tourism stakeholder typology I developed previously. So I suppose, starting to think about Edinburgh's festivals, I'm assuming that many people here are very familiar with Edinburgh. We're all festivals and events scholars after all, but just to give an overview of the festivals. Edinburgh has a long history of festivals post-World War, since 1947, when the Edinburgh Fringe, the International Festival, and the Film Festival came along. And today there are 11 annual city-based festivals that are included under the Festivals Edinburgh Strategic brand umbrella, where Edinburgh is today described as the world's leading festival city. In terms of the summer festivals, there's a glut of those that take place over the summer. They would just be coming to an end normally in pre-COVID world this particular weekend, and that includes the International Festival, the Festival Fringe, the Film Festival, Military Tattoo, the Art Festival, the Book Festival, the Jazz and Blues Festival. And outside of the summer, August period, we've got the Children's Festival, the Science Festival, Storytelling Festival, and Edinburgh's Christmas and Hogmanay. So a couple of images I've included here, which are quite commonly seen when we look at any publicity around Edinburgh. We might be familiar with those sorts of images, one being of the Fringe, another one being of the Hogmanay Festival. Now, according to industry research, in previous years, Edinburgh's festivals have attracted around 4.5 million visitors attending from 70 different countries across the world. They're also said to have generated around 330 million for Scotland's economy. That was some research undertaken by Festivals Edinburgh in 2016. And Edinburgh's growth and evolution of the festival city has been continuing for some time. In fact, at the moment, current strategy asks for efforts from the destination managers to build on the festivals to drive event tourism, and in fact recommend strengthening the festival city status and promoting this world's leading festival city brand worldwide. However, and as was touched on this morning, recent narratives and discussion from local communities and the media, when I say recent, this is largely pre-COVID, because naturally none of the summer festivals have taken place this year, but recent discourses have been quite critical, alongside accusations of destination managers' commodification of Edinburgh's public spaces, particularly in the historic centre. Many of the festivals pretty much take place within Edinburgh's old town, the south side maybe spilling out into the new town. And these are really the historic heritage centres of Edinburgh, UNESCO recognised World Heritage Centre. A lot of this was fuelled by the management of Edinburgh's Christmas and New Year's events in Princes Street Gardens, which made the media lots of reference to Edinburgh as a city for sale, And I know certainly David, who's here today, you were speaking at an event, a quite large-scale event at the start of this year that the Coburn Residents Association set up around that theme. So festivals are mainly located in the centre of Edinburgh. Now, I'm quite fascinated with this idea of what actually is a festival city beyond it being a brand, beyond it being something that we name a festival. And you know, as we know, there's plenty of research out there about that. And this particular paper really draws from my own ongoing research, which is multi-stranded and looking at the visual culture of Edinburgh as a festival city. I said I'm quite intrigued about this title and how different people relate to it, how different stakeholder groups, including destination managers, residents, visitors, and so on, engage, particularly visually, with the festival city, along with how we recognise and how we portray it. Some aspects of the research, I've got images of them here. I've got an ongoing auto-ethnographic drawing project going on, where I've been out to the summer festivals last year and the winter festivals this year, where I've been following tourists around, drawing them and looking at this idea of gazing upon tourists and so on. And I actually exhibited some of my work from this study in the summer, which was quite an interesting thing to do. I've been involved in panels and talks, such as an event at the Edinburgh Science Festival, where we discussed what is a festival city with some festival experts. Another strand is analysis of shared digital images, specifically Instagram images of festival city stakeholder managers. I'm working on that one with a colleague, and also participative arts-based methods, including this festival city map that I'll be discussing today. So these are just some of the areas I've been looking at in recent times. Now this paper draws from two of these specifically. Firstly, by exploring online digital images shared by destination management stakeholders. This is mainly the festivals themselves. Myself and a colleague collected almost 1,000 Instagram images that were portrayed and shared over just short of a year's period, over the full length of the festival calendar within Edinburgh. And we are at the moment, actually my colleague's on maternity leave at the moment, but we will be when she returns, applying a semiotic framework to those. And the other strand here is looking at participative arts-based method, where we constructed a community stakeholders festival city map. Thank you. So just to give some context, the map was constructed as part of Explorathon Researchers European Festival, which was last September. The context for the research, oops, sorry, go back in space. It was in Wester Hailes, which is not an Edinburgh city centre. Just to give some context in Wester Hailes, it's a post-World War II new town built to rehouse city residents from the slum tenements in the centre and Leith and so on. The community is around 4 miles from the city centre. It's in the southwest of Edinburgh. It is made up of 7 quite distinct but dispersed areas, and they all fall within the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, the first decile, making it one of the most deprived areas of Scotland. Now, in terms of Edinburgh's festivals, according to the People's Survey, approximately 50% of residents living broadly around Wester Hailes have attended a festival in the past 2 years, and that's markedly lower than the rest of the southwest of Edinburgh, which sits around 70%, and Edinburgh as a whole is higher than that. And similarly, 58% of residents in this area think the festivals make Edinburgh a better place to live, which is in comparison with around 75 across the rest of the city. And certainly anecdotally from the map that we created in Wester Hailes, engagement with the festivals, at least for adults, is not high. A lot of adults were quite reticent about discussing the festivals, weren't really interested, said they didn't want to go to the festivals. Slightly different for children, because a lot of the festivals run programmes for schools and so on. So the study itself is applying a semiotic method, and semiotics comes from linguistics, and it's about studying signs. So it's about studying signs and systems of signs and trying to uncover layers of meaning and myth through what's being communicated through the signs. There's much writing about semiotics within tourism. And tourism is often thought to be a semiotic activity. You could say being a tourist, being a festival goer is all about how we consume, how we look for signs and symbols of the festivity around us, of the culture around us, and so on. And my paper is drawing from Charles Sandor Peirce's typology of semiotic signs, where he proposed that we see 3 different types of signs. So these being iconic, having the most resemblance to what's being signified. So within what was created here in the map with what's being portrayed, what has the most resemblance to festivalised space, where are these spaces being located, and so on. Indexical signs, which is about, it looks at causal relationships. So where are we seeing evidence of festivals, festival goers, crowds in the streets? And also symbolic signs. You know, a good example of that, symbolic signs can be quite arbitrary, but a good example could be, for example, fireworks above Edinburgh Castle, which is often portrayed and was seen in both sets of images. Okay, so at the moment, I'm currently working my way through the images, undertaking the analysis, but just now I'm considering, as I move forward, exploring the similarities and differences between management and community images. Interestingly, the residents of Wester Hailes very much focused upon the southwest of the map, which perhaps isn't surprising, rather than the city centre, reflecting on the idealised view of the festival city, and also thinking about this idea of accessibility and inclusion. It is quite interesting to see that this area, residents from this area, don't even really venture into the city centre, and certainly not for the festival. And ultimately, I'm hoping to consider the semiotic signs that do sustain this visual culture and the place myth of the festival city. And I think I'm out of time anyway, so thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Louise. That was really fascinating. We do have some interesting comments already and some questions. So I guess we can start with David. So he's basically asking, well, you can read it as well in the chat, but I'm going to try and say it, summarize it as well. So basically asking, like, is this narrative about the show that participation in festival is relatively high from residents of the city? So is that sustainable given the, let's say, peak event nature of what we've seen over recent months? And what do you think might change as a result of this?
I think, yeah, I think that participation in festivals, I'm reading David's comment here as well. Yes, there is a lot of rhetoric that participation is relatively high from residents in the city, but I think that's a very particular type of resident in the city. And it happens to also be very similar to the same type of resident who has been complaining about the festivals and the way they've been using public space in the city. I heard David speak at an event, a really interesting event, really well attended, but it was a very particular resident's voice. And all the way through, I was saying, yeah, but what about the residents here or in the southwest, other parts of the city who weren't represented? And you know, partly that's understandable because the festivals are so very much based in the city centre. But when you go and speak to people in Wester Hailes and my maps out a lot of the adults were writing comments about we need more in Wester Hailes, we'd like more by the canals, maybe a barge festival. There were some great suggestions from the kids as well, who were suggesting all sorts of crazy things like having animal parades outside the zoo, which I'm sure would be logistically wonderful for the zoo managers to organise. But I think there is a real, almost a mismatch here in some respects, because yes, the strategic manager of the festival said, yes, there's a great resident connection and engagement with the festivals, and there is across Edinburgh, but it's not everybody who's in Edinburgh. So how inclusive really are the festivals?
Yep. Okay, yeah, that's there's also and maybe just like we got time for one more question from Bernadette, which is, and you can also have a look, but it is basically asking about this disrupting the myth of the festival city, and if you can just expand on that a little bit.
Yes, yeah, and Bernadette says the myth is very well embedded in Edinburgh, and that's certainly true. We've got everything from the myth of the creation of the festival in the first place. And the festivals themselves rely on this mythology. The International Festival has this story on its website about how Rudolf Bing and his friend, I think it's Audrey Millman, the opera singer, were reflecting on the beautiful castle bathed in the moonlight and how this would be the perfect setting for the festival. And this partly plays into the way the festival was established and then the way the Fringe was established. And I think the Fringe itself has become very much embedded within the myth of Edinburgh and this non-curated type of activity that takes place. So yes, I don't know if that really answers the question or just kind of repeats what maybe Bernadette's saying, but yeah, I think this idea of the myth is particularly interesting.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, hopefully there will be some time also to come back. There are also some really nice comments in there as well. So please have a read, look. And now we're going to move to Nicholas Hell and Gail McPherson from University of West of Scotland. And they're going to be talking about economy and identity as outcomes of local festivals. So Gail and Nicholas, if you're ready, please do take over.
Thank you very much. And Nicholas should be able to speak as well. Nicholas, can you hear? And if he can hear us. Okay. Thank you very much. We changed our title slightly from the one that you have there to Public Value and Identity as Outcomes of Festivals, Wellbeing and Economic Perspectives. So myself and Nicholas work in UWS as part of the Centre for Culture, Sport and Events, and I'm the director of that. And we have quite a unique relationship with Paisley and the local authority in that they part fund the research centre and they funded 3 scholarships. This was part of their bid for the UK City of Culture title. And I worked with them, seconded one day a month, looking and developing, leading the legacy and evaluation work stream for them. And so I was also to lead and develop some of the consultation around engagement with that and facilitating what it was they were looking for. So one of the things that we looked at early on was, what does success mean to you? And I'll come back to that, because success in those terms then led us to, well, is success, you know, winning? Is it about cultural value? Is it about public values? Is it about identity? Is it changing the public space? And so I'll just touch on that in a little bit, but I'm not going to say very much because this is the basis of Nicholas's PhD, so he will take over. So for those of you who don't know Paisley, it's in Renfrewshire, and it's Scotland's largest town with about 77,000 inhabitants. Not very many for some other UK towns, but it is Scotland's largest town. And during the industrial decline of the second half of the 20th century, largely automobile and textiles industries were the town's largest employers, and they either moved abroad or went bankrupt. And from that, Paisley went into decline in population, employment and reputation. Whilst most determinants of social deprivation rose or fell behind the curve in Scotland. So during the early 2000s, the local authority engaged in trying to a series of regeneration strategies to counter the failed development. And these were through the more traditional means of economic development, retail, then trying health improvement approach. And none of that worked. Some parts of Paisley remained the worst health record in Europe. It was the lowest on the SDMI index. And it stayed like that for 30 years, sort of like in Fergusley Park. So with the possibility of the bid, they decided we're going to use culture to do this. And so, but during the bid, they still had a sort of cultural-led regeneration approach. Post-bid, when they didn't win, we've moved to just a cultural regeneration approach, using festivals and events as a main part of that. So really transforming some of their civic spaces, public spaces, giving aspects back to communities, regenerating within communities to get them involved. And that's really transformed a bit. So now what happens is, in housing, in education, right at the heart of that, they're asked, Where is the cultural value? How is cultural part of your planning? Not planning for culture, but part of the planning that you're doing. And of course, bidding for this absolutely borrowed against the European Capital of Culture approach, which was about fostering common values and urban regeneration. We've seen event-led methods, Andrew Smith's been an expert on that, from urban regeneration. I've explicitly used some of these since the 60s, but exploded in the 80s with Glasgow's design of European Capital of Culture in 1990, and of course, like Barcelona's Olympics, being prime examples of regeneration around cities and towns since then. So Paisley, when it bid then for the City of Culture, was considered a long shot, even by Renfrewshire Council. So why were they doing it? Why go in this when you knew that you didn't really have a chance? But they worked on the hypothesis that even a failed bid may restart the economy by creating an economic, social and cultural momentum. It would reignite civic pride. It would bring to attention Scottish Government, Scottish museums, other heritage people that they could actually engage, and it would develop these civic spaces. They did this by bringing on board the OECD as a consultant, and they were developing their recommendation on global events and local development. They asked me to be an advisor on that, and I worked with them in line with Paisley to do this. And that has been hugely fruitful for them. They were able to use the OECD to garner support internationally and nationally, to the point where they now have 100 million spent on Paisley, irrespective of not winning the bid. So the other thing though is the research on this topic about real impact from failed bids is quite meagre, especially in a UK City of Culture case. And with Paisley, the bid was carried out as a cultural led regeneration approach over a major year for the project, as I said. So, I mean, there's lots on this in terms of theory, you know, scholars like Florida, etc., proposing the creative city was the way, and we looked at that, but that's been harshly criticised, as many of you know, even though many cities have followed those principles. On the other hand, some of the work that we've written on previously, David and I, is looking at the impact of culture from a public value approach and what we mean by that, and looking for normative consensus, looking at Nabachi's work and Bosman and Johnson's work of how do we show public value, how do we engage local citizens, what does cultural-led regeneration mean, what do community spaces for events mean to the locals? So we've taken that approach to understanding culture and public life through civic engagement. So now I'm going to hand over to Nicholas, who's going to tell you exactly what he's been doing in the PhD. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, I think there was some feedback from me, so we had to mute me for a while. All right, so this Paisley project made an effort to work with local partnerships and deliberating with civil society to carry out this bid. And these dialogues live on 3 years after the bid was lost, which is about now. These large funding, which Gail were talking about £100 million, they are still being invested in some mid-term cultural projects, which were started by the bid, including major refurbishments of venues and attractions in the civic realm, such as the museum, the town hall, and the public space around the arts centre. This post-bid reality has moved beyond the event-led regeneration of an earlier date into the deeper cultural regeneration approach, which tries to take on cultural perspectives on all sectors of public life, which includes things like housing or healthcare and public and civic space, and also economic planning, which doesn't seem like the traditional cultural areas of policymaking. So the standard approach of evaluating events and festivals is different types of economic impact studies, often with multipliers or the cost-benefit analysis approach. But what was immediately obvious starting the study of this case in Paisley was that the council and Renfrewshire were trying to create benefits differently than this model, despite using that approach for evaluating their own events. So taking on board this Scottish Government approach to well-being, which allows them to see the role of citizen and civic spaces are more important in the creation of public value, and thus adding to well-being. So the argument here is that economic benefits from festivals will still follow from initial development of social and cultural value. And there are lots of academic bodies of work addressing this. Well-being frameworks have been very popular in major countries and major organizations throughout the world for at least 10-15 years now, in the OECD, in several UN agencies and major countries, not least the UK Green Book. And there are some interesting examples of countries working with well-being as inputs into cost-benefit analysis, such as New Zealand. And the Paisley approach ties into this, but on a deeper level with the Scottish Government approach. It goes beyond the UK Green Book and the Office for National Statistics in the UK, including the Scotland Wellbeing Report and the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, both of which are quite present in the Renfrewshire Council's work on this. So initially, I looked at the economic effects of the legacy programs of the City of Culture and the bid. I conducted an extended pilot study at the ambitious Paisley Festival and Events program. The attendee part of the pilot was based on the Atlas Event Evaluation Questionnaire, which is a baseline survey tool for motivations and sentiments and demographics at festival and events. I adapted it for willingness to pay, and I condensed it due to the good access to overlapping data from Renfrewshire Council. But it was clear that the concept of value was much more tied to other things than economic and physical regeneration. So this is where I decided to widen the scope, and the literature review for the study included the intersection of economic events evaluation and public value theory, with some intangible gains such as health and deprivation and place and space identity. Unfortunately, due to the COVID situation, no large events will take place in Paisley in the foreseeable future, and they will kind of take baby steps into it. So I will conduct more secondary data analysis provided by the Renfrewshire Council evaluations, and which is based on the event impact methodology, which is a tool for economic impact analysis, a more traditional tool, but also some qualitative interviews to probe the public value in social and well-being terms. There are many studies that show ties between festivals and increased sense of community and place identity. This is interesting for the Paisley case, as Paisley's reputation is externally and internally weak, and self-identification there is low. Understanding the well-being benefits of identification and pride, as well as the shifted understanding of familiar urban spaces in liminal contexts such as festivals, is crucial to a full appreciation of the benefits of the programs. This means moving beyond the UK Green Book and the influential Measuring the Value of Culture report in the UK, which suggests contingent valuation and choice modeling solutions. Their non-economic evaluation is deemed as not having one accepted method, which is great, but we should still work on that. So we conducted interviews with 3 key actors involved in this bid, partaking in this partnership board that I was talking about. So one said, mobilizing local people has created a sense of opportunity, using civic spaces regarded as being their own. And the manager of a social support organization based on arts and culture explained how their attendee numbers had gone up by 60% as a part of the increased visibility of civil society organizations, including unexpected positive results with issues such as suicide prevention, which again aligns with the Scottish Government's well-being approach, which is broader. Several of the qualitative interviewees add into this that one of the major takeaways from the bidding was the coming together of the town with a novel sense of pride in the place they live. The quantitative questionnaire showed that the most prominent positive aspect of the festivals was variations on the positive ambience, or people are finally out, or the town lives up, and the quality of attractions and shopping were far below in the scoring. And even those losing business, the retail representatives welcomed the use of the town centre for festivals. And as for the economic results, the willingness to pay was still well above the organizer costs, and increased spending in the town centre was deemed significant. So the Paisley example shows that values are produced in many sectors, intangible even to more ambitious traditional methods of evaluation. My continued PhD project will keep working in the concept of presenting economic and broader public values in the same studies beyond the practice of presenting the latter as an intangible or condensing it to a monetary figure. The study that the council took the study reveals that the council took an ambitious approach to using bidding for the City of Culture title as a progressive opportunity to create and add public value in the civic realm for something they want to do anyway, but had been unable to mobilize funds for and political support as well. So this failed bid has had more success for the cultural and economic growth of the town of Paisley than they first imagined. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, there was some kind of a bit of, I had at least some technical kind of problems, issues of hearing, so the sound was a bit breaking, but yeah, so it was, but I'm sure we still managed to get the story out. There is a, yeah, as Andrew is commenting on the chat, these research strategies under COVID-19 restrictions, we are going to be talking more about that later in the panel, so please do join in, and it will be interesting to hear more about this. But also, yeah, I don't know if anybody else got a question or that would like to ask. I'm sure David will have one.
I'll ask one visually.
Yeah.
Nicholas, great. I mean, tell me about what you think is going to happen. We're not just about COVID, but what, you know, the changes that have happened since COVID has struck, I guess, is really kind of challenged Paisley, which was just establishing what we might see as a festivals and events calendar. So, you know, how does a place that's not established in that way respond at this point and think about how it can either U-turn or pivot in some respects to still get some of the value that it was hoping to achieve from it?
Yes, that is indeed a good question. And when I've been speaking to the events team at Herefordshire Council and likes, they have still themselves been very uncertain about how to solve this. And it seems that they will take a very cautious approach to going back to the events, the ambitious events programs that they have had previously. But I believe that they have, at this point, they have started working so broadly with culture and other types of values in broad sectors such as housing and health, that they can still harvest some of the positive effects that the ambitious events program has led to. So I guess that's it.
Yeah, maybe I could come in there. So I think what's happening now is that although they still have the ambition to make the festivals and events to help create more civic spaces and for the town centre to be used, because the retail has gone in many ways. One of the things that COVID has done is been to give more money to local communities and give it back to the communities with some of the community-based projects, looking at the traditional gala days and festivals and saying, well, can we give some money back to be able to have them do smaller scale events that would be allowed with Scottish Government rather than the large scale international ones. So to see us through COVID, still trying to create that sense of engagement and festivity within the communities, and say we actually have a rich tapestry of community events anyway. So I think they're trying to do that as part of their strategy that will see them through. Obviously some funding is going, and you've put in there about Leonie going as well. Big loss, great for Dundee, of course, being able to attract her, and that was always probably going to be the case. But that, I think that is, and as many councils are facing, the cultural budget is the first thing to go, and we're looking at them since we have a strategy with them about funding the research centre, and us looking at some of their festivals and events evaluation, which is now not taking place, as to where that leads some of it. Having spoken to them just last week, then it seems that they're still trying to protect some of the funding for the civic space and public space around the Arts Centre, which was in danger of going, but actually is now being protected. But some of the developments may not continue just because of the funding with local authorities, which I'm sure is the case for lots of people.
Okay, great, thank you. So we are going to move on now to Niamh Nicgowan from University of Limerick, and we're actually going to hear another story related to City of Culture and the process and in this case narrative of place.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Sorry, I'm kind of operating across multiple devices, so you might let me know if I freeze or break up at any point. And I'm just going to share my screen as well. Some desktop.
Yeah.
How's that? Can you guys see my slides now at that point?
No, we can see you.
Okay.
Again.
Sorry. What I'll do is I will I'm trying to share my my slides, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to on this particular device. So what I'll do is I'll just begin, and
Right, yeah.
if that's okay. What I could do, Andrew, just very quickly, is actually send you my slides, and if you want to share your screen, that might be helpful.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I'll busy away doing that while you get talking if you want me.
Thanks, and apologies for the delay. Do you know what I'm actually just going to speak because I don't want to hold us all up, and we'll kick off. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is so first of all, I should say thank you very much for including me in today's conference session. What I'm going to do, I'm going to actually draw on together, hopefully, some of the strands that some of the other speakers have been talking about. I'm going to look at some of the uses of narrative in Limerick's bid to become the 2020 European Capital of Culture. So I'm also talking about a failed bidding process. While the bid was ultimately won by Galway and their year as Capital of Culture is ongoing in what can only be described as extremely adverse circumstances, the bidding process in Limerick was an active period of imagining, consultation and development in terms of the role of culture in the city. While cultural policy can be low on Irish political agendas, to put it quite mildly, the bidding process raised the status of cultural planning and development in Limerick between 2015 and 2016 in particular. So that was really the kind of active process of the bid. For context, for those of you who might not know it, Limerick is the third largest city in the Republic of Ireland, located in the Midwest with a population of approximately 100,000 people living in the city and suburbs. So in 2015, I took part in a university-led think tank or creative policy unit as part of Limerick's bid. And therefore I was quite close with my colleagues in several respects to some of these processes of reimagining and consultation and development as they were taking place. And some of the findings from this experience have already been published with my colleagues, Dr. Stephen Kinsella from the Kenny School of Business and Dr. Anne-Marie Ryan, also from the Kenny School of Business at UL. And we very much looked at the role of the Capital of Culture bidding process as enabling a space for innovative policy proposals and implementation. While the literature, and this was mentioned by a previous speaker as well, on the Capital of Culture programme has tended to focus on the achievements and impacts of the designated cities and what they actually carry out, we found that the bid process itself acted as an accelerator for cultural policy, bringing in many more stakeholders and many more agendas to the consultation and collaboration process. So it essentially went from being high in complexity but low in political priority to very much being high in political priority but very, very quickly with new, I suppose when we're thinking about inclusivity, it brought in a whole range of different stakeholders that suddenly were at the table with very specific agendas in a way that was very quick. So relationships had to form very, very quickly. And our position as being members of this think tank was quite interesting in terms of where we were actually able to sit and observe and be very close to that process going forward. I see someone has just commented that someone should write a book on event bidding, and I think they'd make a fortune, certainly in terms of the number of the spend on consultants anyway. That would be a good idea. So I suppose what I want to focus on in this paper is really to expand on that experience and the evidence base that we were able to gather while we were very close to that bidding team and its formation and development. But also build on the idea of the bidding process itself as a liminal period for a city. So we're quite used to, I think, across the literature, thinking about as festivity and the actual performance of the festival as being liminal in nature and as providing the oft mentioned time out of time in relation to the performance of social relationships. But what I suppose I want to look at as well is the idea of the bid period being used as an opportunity for reinvention, and the bid period is actually being quite liminal as a period of time in and of itself. So the use of the capital of culture designation as a catalyst for image change has of course been examined by several scholars, particularly with a focus on Glasgow in 1990 and Liverpool in 2008 in particular. And Beatriz Garcia noted that since Glasgow, image transformation has been a primary objective for many European capital of culture hosts, but that these claims to change the image of the cities are rarely evidenced in a concrete or robust way, with Garcia describing these image transformation claims as self-fulfilling prophecies, with local agencies and event organizers projecting a city renaissance narrative, resulting in a media discussion that echoes, amplifies, and legitimates this idea. So I think this paper really builds on Garcia's analysis, but focuses instead on the bidding process. Whereas the experience of hosting a capital of culture provides an opportunity to focus on the development and impact of events, the bidding process itself is very worthy of critical engagement, as it provides an insight into the processes of reimagining the city and the construction of these city renaissance narratives, but also providing an insight into who gets to direct and influence that process of reimagining. So if I had my slides, which I don't, but I'm going to pull them up for myself, I just want to read out, I suppose, one of the opening paragraph of the Limerick 2020 bid book. And just in terms of how Limerick as a city essentially used this liminal period. So they said that Limerick is creating a place of belonging in Europe. We are ignited with the electrifying potential of this competition to share our city with an invitation to all of Europe to celebrate our transformation. Limerick had been a non-place in Europe, in Ireland, for a long time. The power of culture made us discover our city as a place on the European map in its own right. As a city of multiplicity, full of contradictions and multiple layers, a place transcending a reputation as Ireland's problem city, seeking not to be fixed in one locality or paradigm, but open to the flow of wider influences. They finish by saying, we are ready for a new Limerick. We realize that embracing multiplicity makes us fall in love with our city and creates a sense of belonging. So the really quite startling statement that Limerick had been a non-place in Limerick and in Ireland, I think gives you the first insight, I suppose, into how Limerick was, how the bid team were taking the opportunity around liminality almost to completely reimagine, to completely propose a new imagined city. And what was very interesting in terms of the bidding process was this was being proposed not only to external stakeholders or potential visitors to the city, but actually for the city residents themselves, the city and suburban residents, as well as the broader national audience as a new city, as an entirely new Limerick. So the liminality, the period of liminality was essentially being used and utilized in order to completely change. And this was actually quite, so it wasn't so much idealized, as Louise mentioned earlier, but complete transformation was what was being proposed. This, I suppose, what we saw was quite complicated in relation to the actual process of data gathering and consultation with stakeholders. And again, we as observers and as people who were close to the process saw the multiple stakeholders, the World Cafes. We were involved ourselves in terms of bringing people into our cultural policy unit to map where their existing cultural values were in relation to the city. So there was a real mismatch essentially in terms of the identification of deep cultural value within the city, and then the proposal of this narrative of a non-place essentially becoming a place, through the inscription of new narratives on the city. What I would show you again if I had my slides, but I don't. Maybe I can get them up for the discussion, and apologies. So I took quite a lot of pictures around the city of where the Limerick 2020 logo was actually inscribed around the city. And what we started to do was to collect evidence of how this concept of the new Limerick, the transformed Limerick, which was very much the narrative that Limerick 2020 was proposing, was actually made material in the city. So looking for material evidence of both where this was being demonstrated and represented, but also in terms of where it was being resisted, in terms of maybe being defaced or being vandalized in different ways. So that kind of actually looking at the I suppose where the concept of Limerick 2020 as this kind of proposed imagined new city was materialized in the very fabric of the city itself, and where it was made manifest. And I think it's worth thinking, you know, when we're thinking about a method in terms of these ideas, to think about the city itself as a rich visual source, the canvas onto which these ideals are being projected and resisted. I also have images of the celebration period, which happened just as the decision team were making their decisions as to the successful city. So the city hosted a street party essentially. We didn't know, I think, at that point that we had been unsuccessful, so there was still a great sense of excitement in the city. I suppose drawing on Kirsty Jamieson's ideas about, well, is this how this idealized city becomes manifest? But it was also a very interesting opportunity to view how this narrative was actually performed and made manifest in the city streets by the residents themselves. So I think it's an interesting opportunity when you're watching and you're very close to this process in real time to actually look at, well, first of all, how are these narratives being proposed? How is the process of consultation actually adapted or changed in order to create a narrative that may or may not have much relationship to that process of consultation? How is that narrative then made manifest, and how is it mobilized across the fabric of the city itself? How is it resisted in the way that it is made manifest across the city itself? And then finally, how is it actually performed in the city itself by residents in a way that perhaps has nothing at all to do with the plans of the bid team themselves? And finally, I just want to point to something that I want to draw out in terms of future research is thank you, is this idea of the vacuum. So somebody earlier mentioned a vacuum in terms of leadership. And I think that is certainly something interesting to observe in terms of, again, what happens when when cultural policy and cultural planning suddenly takes on a high political value and valency and has multiple stakeholders engaging, that then suddenly fall away because that process is ultimately unsuccessful. So what's the residue essentially of that imagined city as it is still manifest and still physically manifest in many ways across the city itself? What happens to those, what happens to the relationships that were mobilized in the process of developing that bid? So these are some of the questions that we want to tease out. And again, our kind of closeness to that process gives us quite a valuable insight into that. I think it's interesting to observe that the process of forming narratives and kind of designing narratives for Limerick City is clearly an ongoing preoccupation, because just before COVID-19, there was a very expensive reveal of a Saatchi & Saatchi new logo for the city, which was Limerick's Edge Embrace. So so I think it's interesting actually to consider, well, this continual process of re-narrativizing the city, of trying to create a new narrative and trying to layer on a narrative of the city, but also, I suppose, to observe how that is constructed, which is very much where the literature exists at present, but also where it is resisted and where it is performed and how it is performed in different ways. So thank you very much, and apologies for not being able to share the images. I'll try and send them to Andrew and maybe he can circulate them afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. That's, yeah, I mean, yeah. Don't worry about don't worry about the slides. It was still really interesting presentation. So yeah, and apparently I'm just gonna start. Yeah, there is somebody already written a book about bid process, and that's our David. But anyway, so there were also some very interesting comments and some questions. So I guess it is mostly what you were saying as well. It's and what David is picking up on is this idea, like in whose name are those bids are made, and also maybe that would be kind of then interesting also, yeah, which is also something that Bernadette is also picking up, this whole idea as being referred to Limerick as non-place sounds quite controversial in the first place, and it is something also that you mentioned now that Sachi and Sachi with his latest initiative, or whatever they are called them, campaign, seems to be saying in a way as well, bringing out that edginess. So yeah, so maybe, I don't know if you could maybe elaborate what are the ways of this kind of including those not only supportive people but also the opposition into this part of the actual process.
Yes, and thank you, Bernadette, for you know, not thinking of Limerick, in fact, as a non-place, but
yeah,
very much as a you know, Viking city with a long history and heritage. I think, and it was actually a point that I think somebody raised in response to Louise's question as well. There's the stakeholder fatigue in terms of consultation. I think Limerick experienced that, and this project, I suppose, building on the research that we previously published in terms of our IU experience, you know, we're trying to, I suppose, identify where is the data, where are the findings that we want to draw out, and try and really make sense of the lived experience that we had as being very close to that bidding process, and yet being quite external as, or, you know, separate as kind of university academics rather than being, you know, so deeply embedded. And I think there was certainly a kind of stakeholder fatigue in terms of the community groups who felt that they had been consulted a lot but hadn't really been given any power or agency in terms of directing projects. And Limerick had been given the national capital of culture designation in 2014, and there were a number of very, very successful citizen initiatives as part of that, as well as the very well received Giant Granny, which was Royal Deluxe as a huge street performance. And they were many of those citizen initiatives, like the Georgian Museum, which was a pop-up museum which kind of looked a lot at Limerick's history in terms of the bacon trade and things like this that it would be well known for locally, were to a certain extent consulted and then not included. And I think that process of consultation and then you know, not actually taking account of the information that was being provided, and as well there was a huge amount of time free, and I think this is actually worth bearing in mind, a huge amount of free time which was given to the bid process. So people dedicated many hours in terms of coming to participate in citizen cafes and world cafes, but then didn't see that being brought through. So I think that you know, in terms of the kind of rapid development of those stakeholder networks can be very, very risky because they're not sustainable. They're built up with a great sense of promise around transformation, but that's not necessarily delivered on. And I think, you know, somebody else mentioned, I think earlier on in the comments, you know, what happens in that vacuum, and to a certain extent, that's something that's very interesting to observe again in the kind of fabric of the city at the moment. Walking around, there's still this material trace of Limerick 2020 logos and slogans and street art projects that's still very much embedded, but it's all peeling and crumbling away now. And so you have this very kind of obvious symbolism in terms of, well, what happens to that dynamic when the bid process itself isn't successful, and many of those relationships are just kind of left hanging to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's great, thank you. Yeah, there are also some really interesting comments again about this idea of rich histories of places. So why do we always kind of try and kind of come up with something new and rebrand or start from over? But what about kind of appreciating the existing value of places already there? But again, as I said, we can try, and hopefully we'll have some time in the end to maybe come back to some of these comments and questions. But I think we should really move on now to Elaine Rath's presentations from University of Portsmouth, and to hear well about frameworks that can hopefully help us understand these complexities of events, and again focused on small towns. So
sorry.
hello Elaine.
Hello, thank you. First, before I go on too much, I just wanted to say I have been struggling with my broadband for the last 20 minutes. If I drop out, apologies, but hopefully I'll be able to pop back in again as quickly as possible.
Okay, great, thank you.
So first of all, again, like everybody else, I'd just like to say thank you for inviting me to take part in this symposium. My research is based on market towns, very small towns, and events that take place within them. So right at the other end of the scale of the city that we've been hearing so much about this morning and this afternoon. Just to position what I've been doing, it's based in the context of struggling town centres, which we all know have been struggling now for a good decade. And it's looking at how town centre events can contribute to town centre vitality. My particular research was supported by Test Valley Borough Council, which is a medium-sized borough within the county of Hampshire. And so they actually wanted me to conduct economic impact assessments of events taking place within their particular borough to help them understand a bit more about how these events contribute to economically. Now, in doing that research, I felt that looking at economic impact on its own was only looking at a two-dimensional approach to the impact that these events actually have. And as we all know, there are other events, other impacts as well, the less tangible social and cultural impacts. So in doing all of this, I then moved away from just providing impacts alone, and then thought a bit more about why policymakers, decision makers, town centre managers and so on actually wanted to put these events on, and by why, a bit more of a deeper why than simply because they wanted to either drive footfall or understand how these events contribute to the local economy. I then discovered in this particular research that there was more to it than that, and there is when you see success in one place, it doesn't necessarily mean success will be replicated elsewhere. And this success, as I think somebody else mentioned earlier, success is subjective. What does it actually mean? What does one town, how do they view success compared to success somewhere else? Now, having seen that some of these events are relatively simple to put on in the small scale, it's hardly surprising that you see a lot of these events taking place up and down the country. Now, just one thing I forgot to say was that although I conducted this research before the COVID situation took effect, what I've tried to do in the last few weeks is to have a look at how people like the High Streets Task Force, which has been set up to try to help regenerate town centres and understand how to revive them. I've looked at some of the reports that they produced to try to see how that might be incorporated into what I've done. I produced a draft framework based on my findings, which the aim for which is to provide policymakers with a framework to help them consider what it is they actually want to achieve when they decide that they're putting on events. So if I go back to the research I undertook and how that led then to the framework that I produced, I looked at 3 events. One was, I'll just share a few photographs on the screen. So have I just lost? There we go. Can you all see that? Because I can't see anybody else now.
I can't see the slide.
You can't?
No.
No, I'll tell you why, because I haven't shared screen, have I?
Yeah, maybe. Try again.
Schoolgirl error. Okay, there we go.
That's great.
Yes, sorry about that. First time. So the 3 events I looked at were it's called the Beggars Fair in Romsey. All of these places are small to medium-sized market towns. Romsey hosts the Beggars Fair on the 2nd Saturday in July annually. It's a free folk music festival, and it's been running since 1993. And it attracts around about 5,000 people. It's free to attend, and it's based around performers setting up in various areas within the town. The town is a medieval, has a medieval street pattern with lots of narrow lanes, as well as a central area. So you have performers in various locations, as well as in an adjacent recreation ground. And typically you'll have performers performing their act, and then you'll have an audience for a short period of time, then that audience will move on to the next act. The second event was an annual food festival that's been running since 2008, and that attracts around about 4,500 people. Again, it's free. It's on the top right, Trout and About in Stockbridge. The name Trout and About refers to the link between the river test on which Stockbridge is built and trout fishing. And then the final event was a monthly farmers market in Andover. Andover is the biggest town in the borough. The interesting thing there was, although the original aim was to look at an annual event taking place in each of these towns, Andover itself didn't really have any annual event of particular note. So we settled then on the monthly farmers market. So data was collected via semi-structured interviews, self-completion and interviewer-administered surveys, observations, and these were conducted with event organisers, local authority representatives, local councillors, sponsors, event attendees and residents. Thank you. And so quickly then, the findings were that the economic impact was actually very, very small, hardly surprising, I guess, for a small town. But what was interesting in this respect was that the type of event seemed to indicate how much economic benefit the local retail provision and service providers actually benefited from. So the calculation I came up with was, it was approximately 2-to-1 ratio. So for the food type events, the selling type events, twice as much money was spent on the stalls than in the town's provision, and it was roughly vice versa for the Beggars Fair, which was an audience type event rather than a selling event. So looking at the findings, just briefly, I developed these 4 key factors that that combine into a framework. And these are based around atmosphere, belonging, place, and reputation. So in terms of atmosphere, to what extent does the event generate an enjoyable atmosphere for all stakeholders? And that can be, it's known in the literature as the psychic income, the feel-good factor, but how does each event do that? In terms of belonging, we've talked before earlier about inclusivity and exclusivity. And one of the points I wanted to make here was it's the ability, so Richters and Palmer have said that by their very nature, events are exclusive. It's the exclusivity that creates the inclusivity on the other end of the scale. So those people who attend the event feel as though they're part of something for a very short period of time, whether they are locals or non-locals who've actually come to visit specifically because they know that event is taking place. The second item in terms of belonging was how well does the event fit with the location? That's not necessarily an automatic given. And the example I can give, I know I'm not explaining this very well because I'm trying to be quick. The farmers market in Andover, you would ask yourself, now the farmers market should be an appropriate fit for a market town, but there's something not quite right with Andover. And I do have my thoughts about why that is, but I won't go into that now. Because then in terms of place, it's the strength of the place, as in the town, as an attraction in its own right. Powell has written about how market towns are those market towns which are best placed to attract visitors are those which already have an attractive hinterland and heritage properties that will help attract visitors. Those which don't may not be able to attract visitors to the same extent. So by putting an event into one of these places doesn't necessarily mean that will be a strong enough attraction. The second item on that is the physical location of the event. So, for example, in the food festival, Trout and About, a cheese stall had been positioned directly outside the delicatessen. And although the delicatessen was very supportive of the event, because this cheese stall was effectively seen as competition, that was seen to be an issue and could cause problems. So it's effectively think about where you're siting your stalls. Might be obvious, but in this particular case it wasn't. And then the reputation of the place and of the event. So the reputation of the place. So Romsey and Stockbridge were already very, very strong as tourist attractions, Andover not so. And the attraction of the market didn't seem to increase the interest in visitors to come to visit. And in terms of reputation of the event itself may be seen by different people to have a different reputation. I can talk a bit more about that, in particular with particular reference to the Beggars Fair, because there's quite a history behind that event, which I can't go into now. So this framework, as I say, is it's a proposed framework at this stage. What I would like to do is test it. Unfortunately, I didn't get the opportunity to do that because of the COVID issues. But also, I'm thinking now it probably needs to have a COVID compliance element added to it to understand a bit more about how and if town centre events can actually start reappearing in the future and how they can do that safely. So any thoughts or suggestions are welcome. And I realise I did rush through the end bit there, and I probably should have spent less time at the start. But thank you very much.
No, thank you. Yeah,
And I shall stop sharing.
that was great, and hopefully we'll give you now a chance to maybe expand if you would like to. Especially that what you mentioned. It might be interesting to explain why do you think that Andover wasn't like as a market town wasn't as good fit for farmers market. So that would be interesting. But also kind of related to that is a question here from. Anna, I believe, yeah, saying that also this difference between Stockbridge and Andover, and saying did you gain a sense of who attended these events and the extent to which they included local residents, because some of that, as you mentioned as well, like Stockbridge would be probably largely tourist audience. So now, yeah, we'll give you a few more minutes to expand on that. Thanks.
Okay. So the Andover situation, historically, all three of these places have been awarded charters in the over time, charters to hold markets and fairs. There's a very interesting history about Andover, if you go back centuries, that Andover has always been a largish town in comparison with the others, but it grew in the post-war exodus, if you like, from London, when it became a London overspill town. So the actual medieval heart has kind of been lost, and there's been a lot of modern development, and the actual focal point of the town, which would have been the town square where the former town hall is situated, and in fact that's the location for the market, is now not the centre. The centre has been moved slightly because there's now a covered modern shopping centre there. But the quality of the shops is not, it's perceived by residents that the quality of the offer is not great. And the residents would prefer to visit Salisbury, which is nearby, or Winchester, they're both nearby, both renowned for independent retailers. In fact, in the time that I conducted my research, Marks and Spencer, which was the only department store, if you like, within Andover, actually pulled out. So they were struggling from the ability to attract good quality retailers. There are unraveling the layers of why Andover is like that would take a very long time, but it also has a military influence, and it's just perceived. When I spoke to residents, what I actually did was contacted them within a 3-mile radius of the town centre for each of the towns, and the reason for a 3-mile radius was because any larger than that, I was then overlapping on my other radius for one of the other towns. But it was interesting that a lot of the respondents commented that they would rather go somewhere else other than Andover. So it's almost like this perception of a reputation of the town that seemed to cause the problem with the market.
Yeah.
Whereas the reputation of the other places are the typical chocolate box English country village, and they do and that's the place promotion message that is sent out via the local authority. So does that answer that question?
Yeah, definitely. That does make it more clear, and it does, yeah, all make sense. And this is also what also Andrew was commenting, that some events maybe aim to disrupt established place identities and images, and maybe that is also kind of important to think about. But yes, and maybe just to finish with a question from Bernadette, who's asking, are there have been some other events that have been developed by community groups of some kinds, maybe?
Yes, there are some. It seems that the community's will to create these events is stronger in Stockbridge and Romsey. Now, there are probably many reasons for that, which I haven't really looked into in detail, but having spoken to these people, my feeling is that because Romsey and Stockbridge are smaller, they have been able to create this community spirit that's very difficult to put your finger on. But having spoken to visitors at the Beggars Fair at Romsey, for example, some people would say they love the feeling in Romsey. They feel like they belong. They feel like for just a very short moment in time, they are a resident or they're a local. And then they go home and forget about it, if you like, or become a local somewhere else. But for this just very short period of time, it's a very welcoming atmosphere. Whereas, and of course, the community is heavily involved in the organisation of both the Trout and About event and Beggars Fair. In terms of Andover, there just did not seem to be the will within the community to create something. So this is the reason for ending up looking at exploring the farmers market, which was organised by the local authority in a direct attempt to bring people into the town to get them to spend money in the local shops, which I found out by conducting the economic impact assessment that wasn't actually working. The more money was being spent on the stores than in the shops, so it wasn't really working. And that's hence why I thought policymakers really need to think more about what it is they're trying to achieve when they're putting on these markets. And so hence the suggested framework.
That is good, and the framework does look really interesting.
I'm sorry, it's not. The sound's gone.
Oh, okay.
It's me. I think it's my broadband.
Okay, but I was saying it will be really interesting to hear how that framework, when you test the framework, and to see how that can be helpful. But it does look very, very interesting and promising. So yeah, I'll just now like to thank all the presenters